You might come from dysfunction, abuse, abandonment, shame, and trauma, but your story is about to be interrupted.
I want to welcome all you guys, like Matt said online. I'm glad you guys are joining us as well. My name is Donnie Carvonen, and I love the team I get to work with. Just before I get into what I plan to talk about, I love working with my two favorite speakers. Pastor Eric and Pastor Graham are my two favorite communicators, and I get to sort of being wingman and help them craft the majesty of their messages and help them with their props and the production. But this week I get the chance to sort of represent the storyline that's going forward. Now, I love this series. How many of you guys have been enjoying Botched so far? It's pretty good. I love the evolution of our artwork as we're restoring something that was broken, torn, and tattered. Bring it back to this valuable piece. It's pretty cool. Art in itself is something that I identify with myself. I am an artist, and I for those that don't know, I dabble. That was what I was planning to do before I got inspired to come into student ministry and youth ministry. In fact, I wanted to show you guys some work. In school when they talk about, show your work in math, I always hated that because I always do math in my head. I always hated showing it. But in art, it's a little different. You don't show your work, you present it. And so I just wanted to show you some of the thought process. When I was starting drawing, you can show that video, you start out with like pencil sketching, and you go from pencil sketching into ink, and then you go into various things. That's something I wanted to do, and I put this little time lapse just a little to show you. I used to do cartoon stuff and comic stuff. I specialized in realistic art, pencil sketching, and dabbled a little bit in painting. But I just realized as I got a little older in life, I could explore new things. They came out with these things called watercolor brush pens, which was amazing because I'm great with pens, but I stink at brushes. And so, not stink, but it's not my favorite thing because when you paint in watercolors, it's permanent. And so that always freaked me out because as most artists are, how many artists do we have in the house? Any people? We tend to become perfectionists. And so when stuff gets messed up, we take, Well, here's, I want to show you some work of some Calvin and Hobbes stuff. This is one of my favorite comic strips of all time. It's my inspiration. This is my thought process. I get my hot beverage and a cookie, and I usually start doodling and with pencil and go to the next one. And then then I ink it. And then this is the first time I added those watercolor brush pens. And so it's pretty cool, a little vibrant. You see that? And then I want to show you something of recent that is sort of a love-hate artwork. Love-hate because it looks good, but go ahead and show it to you. This is because I do comics as well. I love comics. This is the pencil sketch. This is background with brushes. And then I added a little bit more of character. And this is from the Black Panther series. You can go and finish it. Now, the reason why I say I love-hate this one is because that's the second one I did. Because I got all the way to the point where you're inking at the very end. And for those that know, again, watercolors is not my thing. That some of you are already nodding your head. You know what's going to happen. I thought the paper was dry. And so I immediately, as I was putting that last couple of strokes, it just sort of like, and my soul just went, no. And literally, I just sat there and just watched this just spread across the paper. And I wanted to cry. Because, you spend a couple of hours into doing this stuff, and you think you got it figured out. And so I didn't even tear it up. I did one of those ceremonial and left it there and walked out the room. And then eventually came back later and just sort of just put in the trash can. And I think it was 2 days later, I started the whole process over again. And just to let you know, art sometimes can make things feel permanent. And that's sort of like in life. There's some things in life that makes you feel like it's just permanent. We did a series back in January called No Regrets. Remember that series? About tattoos, how to stupid-proof your life. And that's this is like part B of that series for me because there's a lot of things that I feel just take a lot of time to recover. Like tattoos. How many of you guys have a tattoo you don't wish you had? Oh, first one, I don't know. I always was hesitant about tattoos, especially because people wanted me to design a tattoo for them, but I was like, I'm not going to do that because I'm just waiting for someone to bump you and all of a sudden it gets all jangly and stuff like that. Because again, permanency for a perfectionist is a paradox. And that's some crazy alliteration. That's like a tongue twister. I consider myself a functional perfectionist because I have good days. Perfectionism actually is pretty good because we're the ones who put people on the moon because we go through all the details and we got them back. But we're also some people who did some really stupid stuff too, if you think about it. And it's not just me. I think a functioning perfectionism is necessary in art. My daughter, by the way, is an artist too. I actually went and called my wife and said, hey, take a quick picture of some of her artwork and send it to me. So this is my daughter's artwork. She's 15. She's actually in high school. I think she did that a couple of years ago. And she has such stuff that's so intricate and so detailed. But she's like me. She doesn't like to show her work. She likes to present it at the end, and she's very thoughtful about that. I love her style. It's different than mine. It's beautiful. But she has a perfectionist streak in her, too, because if it's not right, she's like, she doesn't want to show it. In fact, this may be a surprise to you, but if you go back and look at some of your old stuff, you're sort of embarrassed, because your new stuff is good. It's like you've gotten better, but you show some of your old work, you're like, but that's where I came from. You're almost embarrassed. Like if I were to show my daughter my high school stuff, she'd be like, oh, I'm glad you improved. It's one of those things. Now I won awards in high school, but that's at that high school. And when you get, again, art is one of those things that get better over time. Now here's the thing about being a functional perfectionist. I have a healthy side and an unhealthy side. The healthy side, I think this phrase sums it up. Where there's a will, you are inspired to tackle challenges because you see these as opportunities to stick to the details and make it happen. In fact, you'll grind out to make the artwork perfect. You'll grind out to make your yard look right. You'll grind out how to renovate your kitchen the right way because this is something of value if you're in a healthy state of mind. In fact, I think it is. A lot of great things, great art is happened by perfectionists. However, you might have heard this statement. If you want things done well, do it. The unhealthy side of perfectionists is sometimes we just don't like other people doing it because we get frustrated. And that was actually by Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a known dysfunctional perfectionist. And so I think we have moments in our life. We can all admit there's some unhealthy and healthy moments. But my talk today is about what happens when you get stuck in one of those unhealthy moments. It's not just like you're driving and, you're driving and using your cell phone, not while you're driving, but you're looking like, this is great technology. This is an iPhone 73, whatever it is. It's amazing. And you're excited about all the details. This is perfect. 1 minute later, you're like, why won't this app open? You get so frustrated. It's like, give it some time. It's talking to space and back, We get so frustrated from one moment to the next. We'd be excited about going someplace. Then at the roundabout, getting there, someone in front of us was like, dude, we put someone on the moon. Can't you figure out a roundabout? Or is that just me? That's just me? Maybe that's too soon, too fresh? We can have these moments, but what happens when we get stuck in those moments? Or what I like to call a life-sucking loop. Not just like the cul-de-sac where the roundabouts, you just keep going around and around. But we get stuck in a position of life that ends up making us feel like we're botched. It's not usually intentional, but here's a theoretical cycle. So we've got this artwork up here. What would happen is, say, I'm out of solution. You can see that we're in the process of restoring this, and we've gotten 2/3 of it done, but obviously you can see I'm out of cleaner. And so here's my dilemma. I have no cleaning solution, so I have unfinished work. I have unfinished work, so now I have no income. I have no income, so I can't get any more cleaning solution. I have no cleaning solution, because now I have unfinished work. You see the cycle? AG online, you ever had that type of cycle with your groups? Maybe you're having that right now online. You've experienced something that's weird and it just can't get out of a loop. Okay, if you were in that cycle, how does that make you feel? What's a word to describe it? Stressed, frustrated, yeah, that's exactly. Stuck. How about this one? You're frustrated in what you see in the mirror, so you avoid the mirror. You avoid the mirror, that makes you start to avoid others because you're conscious of how you look. Now you're avoiding others. Now you have no new help to help you change. Now you have no new help to change to get you frustrated in what you see. You get frustrated in what you see, so now you start to avoid the mirror. Is that a little too close? I know I experienced that during COVID, I could look at the front of the mirror like, ooh, this guy's pretty good. He must work out. Look at the size. Like, I probably shouldn't work out. It's bad for the baby. How many of us have ever been in a life-sucking loop? You've been there? Many of you guys online? Maybe you want to type one of those online and share. It's not that it makes you a bad person. There's things in our lives that sort of stick, and we get ourselves caught in perpetual motion. That's not what we originally happened. It's sort of matches what we're talking about with botched. You know there's something that should be better, but something's just not right. Now, what's worse, life-sucking loops, people who are in those behaviors or cycles tend to attract other people in life-sucking loops. I know many people who have been addicted to a substance abuse. They even go to groups, and I encourage going to groups and seeking it, but they meet up with other people with same or similar ones, and you already know where I'm going. All of a sudden, people who had a substance abuse is now with alcohol abuse or with some other coping mechanism because they've not dealing with the problem, they're adding to it. I've seen people in unhealthy relationships go from one unhealthy relationship to another unhealthy relationship just because they have common ground. And it's almost like it's adding layers, like loops and loops of layers on their life. And it's so much harder to get out of those cycles, especially when you add those extra layers. So if you've ever been in a life-sucking loop, I want to give you guys hope. You're in a good place. You're in a great place, actually. So I think we've all had moments where we wished things would change. Now, probably some of you guys and those of you who are wondering online, this guy's a pastor. He hasn't even talked about the Bible yet. Oh, in the last 10 minutes, he's talked about art. He's talked about loops. Well, just like that water canvas, you got to let it dry. I'm priming something for you guys here. I got to make sure it dries. But we're going to talk about some stuff in the Bible about loops and life-giving loops, but also the life-sucking loops. There's so many characters. There's so many people in the Bible. In fact, I would argue most of the characters portrayed in the Bible has a season that had a life-sucking loop. For example, John chapter 4. You often heard of this story, the woman at the well. In fact, she was the person I spoke about last time I was here on stage. And it's such a dramatic story about this lady. But I would say the reason why they don't give her name, this could be any woman. In fact, it could be any guy. Check out her life-sucking loop. Woman is desperate for love, so she settles and finds Mr. Wrong. She finds Mr. Wrong that then makes her even more unhappy. She's more unhappy, so then she leaves Mr. Wrong and is alone, but now she's alone. She feels like she's even more desperate for love. And so her story continues. I've had roommates on their 4th and 5th marriage or relationship and stuff like that. And you're wondering, how can we get out of these cycles? Again, I have empathy for her because, man, she feels like she's in a rock and a hard place. The beautiful thing about her story is that some of you guys know she was sort of ashamed of just dealing with all the drama because everybody knew her business. So she went out in the hottest time of the day to go get some water because back then they didn't have plumbing like we do. So you had to get your daily allotment. But she'd waited till the noontime because all the other people did it during the morning. So she didn't want to deal with all the gossip, the talking. So she went to the hottest time of the day to get her allotment of water so she could be by herself. She happens to go there, and who's there? So yeah, you guys know the story. Jesus, he actually sent his disciples off, and he was just patiently waiting there, and he ends up having this encounter, this conversation with her. Now, it's funny. He's doing his best to get her out of her life-sucking cycle, and like so many of us, she's arguing with him. She's going semantics, and he tries one approach, and she argues, and she changes subjects because she realizes this guy knows what he's talking about. And finally, something connects where he brings up her past. Jesus peels back a layer in her story that only God would know. And she looks and says, you must be a prophet. There's something different because no one else could do that. And all of a sudden, Jesus, he clarifies that he is the Messiah, and she's just now, boom, her eyes open. Her perspective of who she is on herself changes. Her perspective on who this man in front of her changes. The message that he's saying, this matters. This talk about everlasting water, drinking, and not becoming any thirst anymore. It's like, now it makes sense. She gets so excited, she goes and runs back to town and tells everybody. Her behavior before was in a life-sucking, avoiding people, isolated. Now something changed, where now she wants to act out of an abundance of something. Within a conversation, she has spun the totally different direction. And she ends up bringing her whole city to meet Jesus. A bit of an overachiever. I would say for some of you guys, like, well, yeah, if I met Jesus face to face, I'd probably be an overachiever too. Oh, okay, I'll give you that. Not everyone has that dramatic of a story, but it's still a powerful story. We'll go one more chapter. John chapter 5. Again, nameless person. Man at pool of Bethesda. It could be a woman in this story, but for the sake of storytelling, we'll keep it accurate to being the man in the story here. Here's his cycle. A cripple becomes desperate. His desperation makes him chase superstitions. Now, I got to understand, there's a superstition that if he's able to hang out by the edge of this pool, sort of this pagan area, that when the water bubbles or boils or, troubles, if you're the first one to jump in and be in that area, you were supposed to have this miraculous healing. And of course, that was a superstition. It's just a little hot spring. But he was desperate. And so he sat on the edge of that water for 37 years, hoping that when it finds he can jump in the water. But unfortunately, because of his injury, everyone else would beat him because he wasn't the only lame person. He wasn't the only crippled person. So everyone was trying to get into this water. And so here he sat for year and year, cycle after cycle. So he chases a superstition. He's unable to get to the stirring. Unable to get to stirring because he's been a cripple for many years. And since he's been a cripple for many years, he's getting more desperate. And he just sat there in this cycle. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes up. And it happens to be the Sabbath. It has to be a day that is supposed to be important. He walks up to him and sees this guy here and says, "What's wrong?" And the guy says, "I don't have anyone to bring me into the water." He thought that was his solution. Again, not knowing who's standing in front of him. And Jesus says, "Why don't you pick up your bed and walk?" So this guy had to make a choice. Wow, I've tried everything. What if I stand up and fall down? Are people going to make fun of me? But again, when you're desperate, any hope is good news. So he listens to what he hears, and all of a sudden, he's healed. Now, here's the crazy thing about this story. Is some of the religious leaders, they were upset that this guy got healed because it was on their Sabbath. And of course, after Jesus healed, he went on to go and do many things. And he healed many people on the Sabbath. It's just the religious leaders at that time, they wanted to say what was holy and what was not. They didn't really leave that up to God. And so the religious leaders, they bring in this guy, this man, and start to question him and try to, almost like Debbie Downer, "Why did you do this? I want to get some information. Can you say anything that can entrap Jesus? Because he worked or he did something." And the guy's like, "Dude, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, man. I've got some new legs. I got to go." That I probably, if you had a T-shirt, it should say "Not today, Sanhedrin," and just go. It's pretty much, it was like, I don't have time for this negativity. I don't know what exactly happened, but I was there for 37 years. I've got some time making up to go running out in the fields. I needed to do something. Of course, adding some thought in there, but that's what I would do if I'd been sitting there for 37 years. Lastly, scripture reference I want to talk to is another chapter away, 2 chapters away. In John chapter 8, if you've got your Bibles, you can turn there. We're going to actually read a couple scriptures. If you have your mobile device, it won't take long. This is another general person. It said, "Woman caught in the act of adultery." Now, I could probably cut and paste the life-sucking cycle from before, the life-sucking loop, whatever her circumstances were, but I wanted to pay a little different attention to these scriptures. I'm going to read them, then we're going to, Quentin Tarantino, we're going to read back to the story. So if you want to read along with me or track along, it says this in verse 10. "When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, 'Woman, where are your accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said to her, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.'" What makes this interesting is the first thing I thought about this, because I wanted to put myself into that situation. First of all, if I was that woman and I know I was about to be potentially put on trial to be stoned, I wouldn't have gone willingly. I would have fought, because I've been hit with a stone. Anyone's been hit with a stone before? I had a scar like here for like 8 years when I was a kid from me and my brother getting in a stone fight. Yeah, he got me here. I got him too. But so that, I would never want to be around people, because if you've seen someone getting pelted, and in that culture, that was common for punishment, what caused her? And why was she by herself? Doesn't adultery take two? And so obviously there are some circumstances here that they don't say. So this is my reading into the situation, because much like today in the Middle East areas, often family members will turn people in for the sake of protecting the family honor. This person was adulterous. I don't think this woman had anyone to go to. I think she was trapped. She had no one to rescue. If she ran, where's she going to run? Probably someone turned her in. That's my thinking, my theological view on this. She's desperate. She's thrown before the feet. She doesn't get up, which means she's obviously settled in that this is it. And I can just imagine her laying there on the ground. And imagine there's someone sitting, laying down here on the ground. Then you got these religious, pompous people coming up, and they're standing in literally a stone's throw of her, standing, accusing her, and saying, this is what she's done. The thing that I didn't mention this, that when they say, hey, Jesus, because they're trying to trap Jesus in this, the law says someone's calling out adultery, they should be stoned, they should be killed. What do you say? Because if he says stone them, then all the people he's talked about mercy and forgiveness, he's going to lose credibility. But if he doesn't, he's going against their customs and their traditions. So they're going to catch him in that, again, they didn't like him healing people in chapters 5 and 6 and 7, so here we are in chapter 8. This is what Jesus does. If you want to infuriate pompous people, turn your back to them, start doing something else. So he starts working in the sand. Now, Church of the Highlands, this pastor named Chris Hodges, he talks about what he thought what Jesus was doodling in the sand. And he was like, his theory is, because what Jesus says, any of you who is without sin, you cast the first stone. And he starts doodling in the sand. And Chris says, Jesus is right. Mary, Denise, Janet, like all the people these people have had adulterous relationships with. And so every time they're about to throw a stone, they're like, and they split. That's his comedic take. I looked into this situation. That might be possible. But this is, again, my real-world theological thinking. Imagine the body postures of these arrogant leaders over the body. She's accepted her fate. Here's what Jesus does. I'm not going to be associated with those guys. I'm going to be associated with her. And so, not picking up stones, he's doing something. He could be writing the Ten Commandments. He could be making a Calvin and Hobbes drawing. He could be doing whatever he wants down here in the sand. But for a moment in life, he was the only other person on her level. And so he could not be perceived as an accuser. So I don't know if you ever try to throw stuff when you're sitting down. You don't get the leverage. So he's no longer threatening to her. He's contradicting to what they're doing. After they leave, what does he do? He stands up. That's what the scripture says. He raises himself up. And then he brings her up. It's a beautiful picture of restoration. There's a part of that where I love where he says, where are your accusers? And she says, it's just you and me. He says, I don't accuse you. He was just there on the dirt. He wasn't going to throw stuff. Something very powerful happened there. Same thing with the woman at the well and the man at the edge of the pool. They all encountered Jesus in different ways. But something happened from their life-sucking loop. They encountered something that became a life-giving loop. A life-giving loop is this. This is a very basic one. We see this happen in the scriptures. We see how we see ourselves affects then how we see God. And how we see God affects how we hear what he says. And then how we hear what he says affects how we see ourselves. This is what happened in this story. The woman who was at the well, she heard what he says. All of a sudden, that changed the way she saw herself. The way she saw herself changed the way she saw him. And it just kept on going the cycle. It happens with all of us. So I have to ask this question for us. I have to ask these questions. We're in this series called Botched. Where are you in this cycle? Because in week 1, we talked about our value. Pastor Graham did a fantastic job. And if you're struggling with how I see myself, go back and watch the first week about how we realize that we're a masterpiece in his artwork. We're not defined by our tears, but we're defined by his sacrifice, his forgiveness. In week 2, how we see God. Again, remember Toad up here, being patient as a restorer, not someone who's slapping the hand away. No. Sometimes we view God as this Gordon Ramsay's, the guy from Hell's Kitchen, that we offer our life to him. He's like, smashes it away and sends it back to the kitchen. That's not how God is. So this week, the question is, how do we hear what God says? What is he saying to you? I'm going to let that sit there for a second. How do we hear from God? How do you hear from God? And what would he be saying? Now, I'll tell you what he has said about you. You can go back to week 1. Talk about, Graham did this as well. He says, you are a masterpiece. You're created in his image. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You can go through the scripture. There's a whole bunch of things that he's saying, I am for you, not against you. In fact, I came to this world to save the world, not to condemn the world, but the whole world could be saved. So many things of life spoken over us that we forget. And here's the cool thing. Here's the thing as my friend Hunter is about to do something really cool. You know when God said, let there be light, for those of us who follow that? Things happen. Some believe it could have been the Big Bang, creation happened, whatever. He said something and light happened. And the universe is continually expanding. I think it's because his word is still going out there. It's still echoing out there. And I think everything that he says is continuing. When he looked at this man and woman, he says, they're good. He still speaks that over us. Now, granted, there are things in our lives that are botched, but God knows what good looks like. He knows what only he can bring us back to it. He knows what layers he needs to peel away. But first, we need to hear the positive layers, the life-giving layers to speak over our life. There was a song that I heard ways back, and it reminded me of Mr. Hunter Dawson because he was in that era of youth ministry. But he also does this cool thing about loops. And as you guys, I want you to think about that question. What is God speaking to you? I want you to listen to him as he uses this song that has 3 parts. One part talks about how you see yourself. One part talks about how you see God. And I think the third part, the bridge at the end, is what is God speaking to you? And listen to the layers of this song.
And I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord. And I will bow down before you, only you, Lord. Take my friends, take my fear, take I'm leaving it I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord, and I will bow down for you, only you, Lord, and I will worship you, Lord, only you, Lord, and I will bow down before you. It's just you and me. It's only you and me. It's just you and me. It's only you and me. And I will worship. It's only Lord, only you, Lord. It's just you and me. We'll bow down before you and me, Lord. It's just you and me. It's only you and me. It's just you and me now. It's only you and me now.
One-man band. But I love all the layers of loops, the life-giving that's sort of built on top of each other. And if we talk about how life-sucking loops can compound, so can the opposite be true. You can find things in your life that can add life, and then other things on top of it. In fact, you're doing it right now. You had a worship service. You have a speaker. You're having things that are adding life, giving things on top of one, on top of the other. You have opportunity to talk with people in your community, adding life, giving loops. You have the opportunity to read your scriptures. You have an opportunity to pray. You have an opportunity there's a lot of things you can encounter Jesus and find life, to break and to get out of life-sucking loops just right now. Even online, AG, I'm sure you can probably attest to this. There's conversations that can happen online that can start that catalyst change. One of the things that I was processing that question, what are you speaking to me? What do you hear God saying? And this was sort of enveloped in that song. It says, it's the big idea for today. Complete surrender precedes complete intimacy. In this song, it talks about the position of take my life, I lay it down. Not like he's depressed. He's more like offering. Like I'm no longer fighting you. I'm no longer fighting the restoration process. God, you do what you need to do. And then he acknowledges who Jesus is. He acknowledges God, and I will worship you, Lord. Again, that's complete surrender. And as that moves his heart towards God, God is already standing there. And in that song, I believe it's a response. I take it as a response with God saying, it's just you and me here now. All your accusers, there's no one here to throw stones. And you can have those definable moments. I believe complete surrender is important, but it doesn't happen. It seldom happens instantaneously. It usually takes time. It takes for you to develop trust. God peels back one layer, and you're like, and then, okay, I'm good. All right, we're good. And it's like, okay, we've worked in this area. Now we go here. Now we need to start up here. But to be honest, I'm still working with that. I mean, I'm turning 47 this year, and there's a lot of my canvases been restored, but there's still a lot to go. I mean, I'm not as old as these guys, No, I love the Hofers. So I know God's still doing work. So I got to continually find places in my own life that when I get caught up in a moment and start getting in a life-sucking cycle, that I've got to hold on a second. And I'm so grateful that I have people in my life that can catch me and to keep me there. So there's two things we learned from this story. Number one, God desires some one-on-one time with you to do only the things that he can do, which apart from him would be otherwise impossible to experience. Those God moments. I've had those God moments where he just gets your attention and it's just you and him. You need those moments. But you also need Number 2, God desires to use the life of others to add shades and colors to your life, that which apart from community would otherwise be impossible to experience. I've talked a lot about myself, but I'm going to talk about someone in this room and someone who's online. They don't know this. There's this guy online, his name is Mark. He was going through a very tough life-sucking cycle. He was dealing with some medical issues, and he was going through treatments, and he went through it all. And he was frustrated. He gets on a plane ride, and his story, he would tell you that he tried the church stuff. It wasn't for him, and he was just in this funk, and he was just having a hard time giving up, much like the woman thrown at the feet of Jesus, just there. All of a sudden, here comes this crazy shoreliner. Mark didn't know this guy from anyone, and just sits next to him, and this crazy shoreliner is usually outgoing, and he usually talks to people, and he starting a conversation. Of course, Mark, you tell there's something there, and I wish I had time to have you up here, Rich, to have you actually do the conversation. But what ends up happening is Rich has helped champion Sanctuary Friends for people who need some help recovering. And so here's this guy, Mark, sits next to one person who's qualified to understand what he's going through, because being a medical person. And here's this guy who has all these medical questions and challenges for years. And he actually started having conversation. And again, well, with the details not being important, but Mark's now getting excited. It's like, wow, there's someone here. Someone is talking about, sees me and sees what I'm going through and gives hope. So the offer was made, hey, why don't you come in? And of course, Sanctuary Friends wants to bless him. And this changes Mark. He goes back home, tells everybody. In fact, he starts buying teddy bears. He starts doing stuff, and people see, why are you so excited? Why are you doing this? And they start giving him resources to give to this charity because it's meant so much to Mark. And so I know I'm sort of outing Mark, but you'll get to meet him next month because he's coming here to get baptized. The cool thing about that story is he wanted the first time coming to Shoreline, first time coming to Florida, he wanted to do it and get baptized. And so it's taken him a little while because of, again, logistics. But what a beautiful story about a person in the right place, speaking life. You don't know what's going to happen with people, and all of a sudden you get him calling you back, and you don't realize that you're changing not only his life, not all his nurses think you're crazy, but love you. They think it's awesome, and they want to do more, because now it's inspiring life momentum in other people's life. Isn't that what it should be? I love the fact that you don't have to stay in a life-sucking cycle. I think it's a beautiful thing. See, I believe that God does desire each of us to have community. And there's this German theologian that I adore, and our German on staff, he reminded me, he's like, well, Donnie, Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, and I was like, oh, that's great. So he sent me the quote, and I got to read this quote, but I can't do the German accent because now we have 2 German people on staff, and they'd be upset. But he says this very profound thing. Let him who cannot be alone beware of community. Let him who is not in community beware of being alone. Each by itself has profound perils and pitfalls. One who wants fellowship without solitude plunges into the void of words and feelings. And the one who seeks solitude without fellowship perishes at the abyss of vanity and self-infatuation and despair. We need those just you and me moments with God, those moments alone. Pastor Eric was talking about his experience that he found some alone time, some silence, and it was profound for him. There's some of us that also just need community, that we've been alone too far, too often. So here's what I propose, a life-giving cycle. And again, bringing back that question, where are you at? What is God speaking to you? Here's a new life-giving cycle that I hope that you can find your spot in. Because at Shoreline, we talk about how we want to change people's perception of God by changing the perception of church. Well, maybe you can see yourself in this cycle. How I see myself changes how I see the church. Because if you believe what God has said about you, you believe that you are the church. It's not this building. But if you don't believe that, then you believe the church is of them. But if you believe it's in us, then how you see the church, how you see around you, changes how you see God. He's part of your story. And how you see God helps how you see other people. If he loves them, then I've got to love them. And if I have to love them, someone's got to see me that I'm worth love. And if I'm worth being loved, then our church should be about loving. And you see how the cycle starts changing. So if you're here this morning, you can, Hunter, you can start playing. As we wrap this up, I want to challenge you guys with, what is God saying to you? Where do you hear from God? Is it when you by yourself? Maybe you need to find a moment. Even a room, you can find a moment with just you and God. But we also have over here a prayer area that there's people here who have life-giving stories, and they want to hear and talk to you and pray with you and speak over you and believe the best in you. That you can have an opportunity that if you need community, find some prayer, but a great place. I know there's 80-something people they're committed to Rooted this semester. We just did week 1. Isn't that amazing? So those of you who signed up, stay with it. Keep the courage going because you need those people. That's a great place. But if those of you there's a waiting list for our next Rooted already. That's exciting. But if you're on the waiting list, don't wait till the next semester. Get involved in our communities, in our men's communities, women's communities, tribe. You can find so many communities to get involved with. But I want to encourage what you're doing. For those of you online, what is God speaking to you? Don't rush out of here this morning without starting a life-giving cycle if you feel stuck. I'm going to pray. And then I'm going to ask you guys, if you want to continue prayer, you can stay praying in this room. You can go to the prayer area. Those of you online, you can talk with AG, the moderator. But I'm excited that next week we have the finale with Pastor Graham. You get to see the restored artwork complete. And I'm praying that God is going to continue peeling layers on your life. So, Father, I just thank you for this group of people, that you will not only bless them, but you will fashion them in your image. You continue to bring out the masterpiece that is behind those layers. And Lord, there's people in here that are looking for a new life-giving cycle, nice life-giving loop. And I pray that you will connect them today with people that can speak over life, speak into the life, and they can embrace being vulnerable. They can surrender parts of their life, not only to you directly, but in a community of trusted friends, that they can truly experience what it means to have life everlasting. Lord, we thank you that you are the restorer. You are the healer of not only our lives, but what you're doing in Shoreline and across the world. We thank you for this. In your name we pray. Amen.